The rise of the far right and neo-fascism is one of the most important political developments of the last decade. The history of the middle part of the 20th century is to a large extent the history of fascism and the trail of carnage it left behind it. We all need to be really attentive to the rise of fascism in today's society. Hello, welcome to Attic Philosophy, welcome to the Attic. I hope you're staying safe and looking after yourself. In Attic Philosophy, we're talking about metaphysics, language, the mind, social philosophy. This is part of a series of videos about truth. Check out this playlist here. In this video, we're going to be looking at how truth functions in society and how that function gets abused in fascist societies. I'm going to cover this topic in two parts. In this, the first part, I'm going to look at how truth is supposed to function in society. We'll look at what fascism is and how it tries to destroy that function of truth. And then in the second part, we're going to focus in on conspiracy theories and how they're used by fascist politics and by the far right to destroy our shared sense of reality. So first up, how does truth operate in a healthy political system? Well, truth is a norm in society. Obviously, not everyone tells the truth all the time, but most people tell the truth most of the time. If we didn't tell the truth most of the time, words would lose their meaning. So it wouldn't be true to call this a watch and this a phone. But if we all started doing this, the word watch would come to mean this kind of thing, and the word phone would come to mean this kind of thing. So we would go back to telling the truth. So linguistic meaning in society sits on this foundation of our practice of telling the truth. Truth is also an essential component in a well-functioning democratic system. In order to make democratic choices, citizens need to be well informed. That requires sources of information to tell us the truth. We can then take those bits of information and make informed choices. If you don't have that, you can't run a democratic system. And this is how truth in society links into fascism. Fascism basically tries to destroy that regulative ideal, that norm of truth. It tries to destroy these sources of information. So what is fascism? Fascism, it's a far-right, authoritarian, ultra-nationalist way of organising society. It is strictly hierarchical. And right at the top, you have a leader who is like a kind of patriarchal father figure. It's always a he, it's always a man. Fascist societies tend to feature forcible suppression of any political opposition. There's no free political discussion, there's no free press. So the model of a fascist dictator is the father in a traditional patriarchal family. Their authority is absolute. So some examples: you've got Nazi Germany under Hitler. You've got Italy under Mussolini, Spain under Franco, from the end of the Spanish Civil War up until Franco's death in 1975. More recently, you've got Chile under Pinochet, and you've got Paraguay under Stroessner. In most of these cases, these leaders took power by force after an armed coup or after a civil war in the case of Franco. That happened in all of these cases except for Hitler. Hitler had tried an armed coup in 1923, but it wasn't successful. Hitler more or less took power by democratic means. There's also elements of fascism in the ideology of Hindutva. This is the far-right nationalist Hindu movement in India, and it's supported by Prime Minister Modi's BJP party, the ruling party currently in India. So in this discussion of fascism and its relationship to truth in society, I'm going to be drawing on Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works. There's a link down in the description. In his book, Stanley picks out 10 aspects of fascism. I'm going to focus on 3 of them: the mythic past, anti-intellectualism, and what Stanley calls unreality. These are aspects that relate to the way we engage with truth in society. So first up, the mythic past. Stanley says that fascist politics invokes a pure mythic past which is supposedly tragically destroyed. So according to Stanley, in this mythic past, an extreme version of the patriarchal family reigns supreme. But this has been lost by the humiliation brought on by globalism, liberal cosmopolitanism, and respect for universal values, such as equality. So I guess the classic example of this concept of the mythic past is the Nazi concept of the Aryan race. Okay, this never really existed, but the Nazis adopted this concept as a way of telling German citizens that they were different from the rest of the world. This kind of way of thinking, it's inspired the Hindutva movement, the Hindu nationalist movement, which currently operates in India. So according to Hindutva, Hindus were the pure indigenous population of India. And over time, it was corrupted first by Islam and then by Christianity. So according to Stanley, Hindutva has fabricated a version of a mythic Indian past with a pure nation of Hindus to dramatically supplement what is regarded by scholars as the actual history of India. More recently, we're seeing this kind of way of thinking come up again. So the AfD, the far-right political party in Germany, far-right Holocaust deniers. In 2017, one of their spokesmen called for the past to be returned to the people of Germany, meaning that the established facts about the behaviour of the German state, the German military during the Second World War, should be kind of overwritten so that Germans could be proud of their history. All of these ways of thinking are false, they're fabrications, they're lies. And you might say, well look, all politicians lie, that's an established part of the way that politics works. But in fascist politics, it isn't merely lying, it's more than that. It is a concerted effort to overwrite the truth, to displace the truth, so that truth is no longer the foundation of society. Let me give you an example, again from Jason Stanley. Mussolini, in his 1922 speech to the Fascist Congress, said, "We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality." He was saying this publicly. He was saying in public, we don't care about the truth. What we care about is political identification. And as Stanley says, the strategic aim of these hierarchical constructions of history is to displace truth. So in a fascist society, truth will no longer be a foundation of society. It won't be a foundation of democratic debates. Fascism is anti-intellectual. Stanley says, fascist politics seeks to undermine public discourse by attacking and devaluing education, expertise and language. When education, expertise and linguistic distinctions are undermined, there remains only power and tribal identity. When they come to power, fascists try to replace universities as sites of learning, research, free thinking, telling the truth, with sites of propaganda. So they won't always abandon the universities, they won't always prohibit the universities, but rather they will kick out free-thinking academics and replace them with propagandists. So for instance, an example of this, the Russian government persecuted the European University of St. Petersburg, a liberal, free-thinking institution, and it eventually closed it in 2016. In modern-day Hungary, Orban's government consistently attacked the Central European University. This was a very liberal university, it was very highly ranked, it was free-thinking. After all these attacks, it was forced to close. It moved to Vienna in 2019. Because it was funded by George Soros, who's a famous Jewish philanthropist, the Orban government, it kept putting out all this propaganda about how it was run as part of the Soros plan, which is basically an anti-Semitic dog whistle, this idea of there being a Jewish conspiracy to take over the world. It's characteristic of fascist regimes that they reject experts and expertise. So example, the contemporary far-right American radio host Rush Limbaugh, he said that science has become a home for displaced socialists and communists. This is a way of signalling to his listenership, don't trust scientists, don't trust experts. Now you might say, why would anyone try to undermine expertise in a systematic way? Doesn't society need it? Well, yeah, it does. But this plays an important function in fascist discourse. It's seeking to undermine informed public discourse. It's trying to impoverish it. Hitler was explicit about this. He was explicit about the importance of trying to impoverish public discourse in order for a fascist society to be set up. He said, all propaganda should adapt its intellectual level to the receptive ability of the least intellectual of those whom it is desired to address. In other words, dumb it down as much as you can. The receptive ability of the masses is very limited, said Hitler, and their understanding small. On the other hand, they have a great power of forgetting. That's in Mein Kampf. In other words, yeah, dumb it down, don't worry about the truth, and because people forget, you can say one thing one day, another thing another, and as long as the media support this, it's not going to be a problem for you. Does any of this stuff sound kind of eerily familiar? So when you have this concerted attempt to undermine expertise, to undermine truth, when you have this concerted attempt to undermine truth and expertise in society, what happens is that basically propaganda is going to replace reasoned argument, democratic deliberation. And it's going to replace it with more or less irrational fear. It's going to replace it with tribal political identifications. Who's in my team? And this is done explicitly. It's done knowingly by the far right, by fascists. So for example, Steve Bannon, the guy who was responsible for the campaign that got Trump elected in 2016. In a 2018 interview, he said that we got elected on phrases like drain the swamp, lock her up, build a wall. This was pure anger. Anger and fear is what gets people to the polls. Think about what he's saying there. So according to Stanley, fascist politics degrades information spaces, occluding reality. Stanley's talking about the way in which a fascist leadership tries to undermine our grasp on reality. And it tries to replace that reality with its own constructed version of events, which isn't in any way tied to the actual facts. It's based around a group identity, an identity that serves itself, that serves its own ends. He says that in a fascist society, reality itself is cast into doubt. We can't agree on the truth. Fascist politics replaces reasoned debate with fear and anger. So it isn't just that the fascist leadership tries to replace one version of events with another. Okay, many politicians might try to do that, might try to get you to see things, events in their own way. Rather, the fascist approach is to get rid of a coherent version of events at all, so that we then don't go looking for what is the true course of events. Rather, we just look to what we're told to do. We are then led by fear and anger, rather than by looking at events and making up our own minds. How does a fascist state go about this? How can you destroy the very notion of reality? Well, through regular and repeated lying, supported by the media. If the leaders lie enough, and if that lying is obvious enough, and if it is supported by the media, then the very notion of our leaders telling the truth and us believing them and us believing that reality is that way, it just goes out the window, so that we can't then have any coherent conception of political reality. So Stanley says a fascist leader can then replace truth with power, ultimately lying without consequence. Again, does that ring any bells? So one way in which a fascist leadership might go about this is by making pronouncements, by their leader saying things, and they basically say one thing one day, one thing another, supported by the media. That's one way in which it can work. But there are other, more subtle ways. Often they will try to delegitimize our trust in experts. One way this can be done is via conspiracy theories. I'm going to discuss conspiracy theories in detail in part 2 of this video, link here. In part 2, I'm going to discuss how conspiracy theories are used by fascists and the far right in order to destroy our shared sense of reality by attacking science, attacking our trust in expertise. If you've enjoyed the video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button, and if you want to see more like this, consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for listening this far. There's a lot of challenging issues going on here. If you've got comments on them, please leave me a comment below. And look, there is so much going on in the world right now. Look after each other. Call your elderly relatives. Stay safe, everyone. I'll see you next time.